The big R is revenue. We all know this. Revenue. Your revenue is directly impacted by your retention, by your refund rate, and all of those things are easily swayed and impacted by your community manager. So if you haven't been thinking about the community manager role like this, with the importance and the weight that it has inside of your programs, all right, friends. So I am in the process of making some hires inside of my company. And I've been asking a lot of people about team building and what that means to them and the mistakes that they've made. And one of the things that I've gathered is that there are some pretty important roles that people play inside of companies. But I think that there's one that's the most important of all. Yes, the most important role inside of your company, especially if you're a course creator or a membership site owner, or you have a group program, I think you're going to agree with me. So what's that most important role? Well, it's the role of your community manager. Yeah, your community manager, that person that you probably just hired from within your community, that maybe you never really even trained, who, as you know, has the keys to the kingdom, to everything that you do. That's the role of the community manager. And I believe it's the most important role inside of your business. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why it's the most important role. And if you know me, you know I love alliteration. So we're going to go with 3 R's today on this one. Okay. 3 R's to tell you why the community manager is the most important role inside of your online business. And the first R is representation. Representation. Yes, your community manager represents you and your business in everything that you do. They are often the first person that somebody meets besides you after purchasing your program. And they may even be the first person that they meet other than you before they purchase your program. But either way, that community manager in their day-to-day work of interacting with people inside of your community or discussion forum, getting on calls, leading group calls, whatever they might be doing to help cultivate a thriving community for you, they are interacting directly with your customers, with your best customers and with your worst customers. And they're representing you in how they do that. They represent you in how they handle conflict. Or a tough customer, they represent you in how they celebrate people and how they guide people. They represent you in their tone, in the culture that they're trying to cultivate inside of these communities. They are a representation of you and your brand. So yes, number 1, representation. That is a good reason why they are the number 1 most important role inside of your company. Number 2 is relationships. If you've been in business for any amount of time, you know this to be true. One of the most valuable things, if not the most valuable thing in your business, outside of all the revenue streams that you have, outside of all the skills that you've acquired, are the relationships that you've built. Those can be affiliate relationships. Those can be friendships that you've established. And then there's your customers. Your customer relationships are managed by your community manager. So if you were to think of your community manager as a relationship manager, and you looked at your community of maybe 100, 500, 5,000 people inside of that community, and you knew that you had worked really hard to establish relationships with each of those 500 or 5,000 individuals, how would you feel about handing those relationships over to somebody else to help nurture and to maintain? You would care a lot about that. You would want to know how that person does at maintaining those relationships. You would find that to be a very valuable and important role. So I want you to think about your community manager like that. This is an individual who is going to be maintaining, nurturing, cultivating all the relationships within your community. They're the one who should know when they have wins to celebrate, when they've fallen off the path and need to get brought back on and reactivated, when they're having a hard time, they need to be reached out to. Those relationships, good, bad, and indifferent, are all going to be managed by your community manager. So that's the second reason relationships by the community manager is the most important role inside of your online business. And the third reason, the third is maybe the most obvious, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, it is retention. Retention. Community managers have a direct impact on your retention rate. Now, for some of you, you might be course owners and you're like, well, I don't really care about retention rate. Well, you should, because that's a refund rate for you, right? That's how many people actually complete their payment plans. Those are all sort of retention related numbers. And all of those things drive up to the big R. I didn't say there was going to be four, but the big R is revenue. We all know this. Revenue. Your revenue is directly impacted by your retention, by your refund rate, and all of those things are easily swayed and impacted by your community manager. So if you haven't been thinking about the community manager role like this, with the importance and the weight that it has inside of your programs, I really want to encourage you to do that, because your community managers, they represent you. It's first reason representation. They represent you in everything that they do inside of the program. You are passing a torch of your brand, whether that be a personal brand or a business brand, for that community manager to carry. The second thing is relationships. You're basically handing over your black book of relationships to your community manager. And the third is retention, which has a direct connection to your revenue. If you haven't looked at your retention numbers, talk about that in another episode, but that has a really direct impact on your revenue. And your community manager is the one that can influence retention more than most other people inside of your business. So what does this mean? Why should you care that this is the most important role in your business? Well, what I find is a lot of people take hiring in this role pretty lightly. They hire their cousin, their friend, they hire somebody from within the community because they're like a really great cheerleader. That does not mean they make a good community manager and are worthy of that role and position and the weight that it carries. So when you're thinking about hiring a community manager, I really want you to be intentional about who you hire, because you understand the value of that role. You understand the risk that having somebody in that role, what that risk is if they don't do a good job in that role. And that also means that you really need to be invested in training them and supporting them. If they're going to represent you inside of your communities, inside of the, outside of your communities, maybe just in your world, as you go out into the world to establish community, they're going to be representing you in that way. They're going to be holding these relationships sacred in so many ways. You want to make sure that they're trained and equipped to do so. And not just once, but that they're supported ongoing so that they continue to grow inside of their leadership abilities, so that they can continue to just represent you more and more. And as your business grows and your community grows with it, then your community manager needs to be able to grow with that, because they are going to have more responsibility. They're going to have encounter more conflict, more risk as the community grows, and your community manager needs to be a great leader in order to handle that. So your community manager, without a doubt, is the most important role inside of your online program. So that means I want you to make sure that you invest well in them, that you train them well, and you support them well. And when you do, they will be an absolute rock star. You will experience so much ROI from having a well-hired, well-trained, and well-supported community manager inside of your business.